What do you want from me? What do you want, Riot? You haven't released a story in a month! Everyone is playing Fortnite and Elden Ring! Just do something! I swear to God, if it's a sexy champion. As you can see, Riot abandoned us this month, so I have to reach for the reserve ideas. Over 2 years ago, we ranked all champions based on how good their lore is. Since then, the lore moved forward quite a bit. Last time we used tiers such as Essential Read and World Building because some champions explained essential parts of the world. These days, pretty much every champion reveals something new, so the World Building tier is getting dumped. Now we are left with the classic S to F ranking, with the occasional forgotten champion. But now, because there is a lot of champions ahead of us, let's get on it. Remember, all of this is subjective, so if I rank your favorite champion low, But don't worry, the stories are generally good, there won't be too many bad champions. Starting alphabetically with Aatrox. Aatrox on his own is pretty average, but he has some great connections to Tryndamere. And with the Darkin lore, he can comfortably sit in B. Ahri's story is pretty deep, she appeared in 3 different stories. And Ruined King gave her some really interesting new background. S. Akali's bio is pretty short, but she does appear in the Z comic. And her Bow and the Kunai story, which may be teasing a new champion, is amazing. A. When it comes to Akshan, truth be told, they did him dirty. Yes, he was a pivotal character during the Sentinels of Light, but for someone who is wielding such a crucial weapon, he's just not an interesting character. D. Alistar's bio is kinda cool. He has an interesting history with Noxus, but he never appeared anywhere since. D. Amumu is just a legend. No one knows anything about him. He does have a decent amount of speculating lore, but it's frustrating to know that he's just one massive mystery. C. Out of all the Freljordian demigods, Anivia has the least lore. She gets a C, but only because Ornn and Volibear carry her. Annie is a lot creepier in the lore than she is in the game. She also has her own cinematic, but the story called Trouble easily gives her a B. Aphelios is as complex of a character as his own kid. Loads of Targonian celestial reveals. A. For being one of the Freljordian leaders, Ashe doesn't really have anything happening around her. She is a B, but only because her comic was awesome. If you like cosmic lore, Aurelion is awesome. He gets an A because of how meaningful his lore is. Being the Emperor of Shurima, Azir is really important for the entire continent. He only gets an A because he is not as interesting as everything that is happening around him. Bard gets a B because his recent update gave his story a reason. From his mask to the meeps, it all makes sense now. And if you know his recent story, you know he's going to be important when the Void attacks. Unfortunately, Blitzcrank is one of the Zonite characters that was kinda forgotten. He does get a C because his ensemble story is adorable. Even though Brand's bio may be kinda boring, his story with Ryze, called From the Ashes, is so good he easily reaches an S. Most of Brom's story is just legends. But man, are those legends awesome. Also, he appeared in the Ruined King. A. Remember, Arcane is a separate universe from the core lore, so Caitlyn's story here is slightly different. But it's still pretty awesome. A. While to many, Camille may not seem like an interesting character, The Weakest Heart is one of the best stories League of Legends has ever seen. Easily S. Cassiopeia got a lot of interesting lore around Azir's release. And then it stopped. That was 8 years ago. C. Cho'Gath currently has no canon lore. Corki currently has no canon lore. Darius suffers from one unfortunate thing. Despite him having a lot of lore in the comic, Noxus is a lot more interesting than him. B. Diana and Leona don't have enough great lore to be at the very peak, but their recent story together easily gave them an A. Draven is just worse Darius. C. Mundo's story doesn't explain anything. We all thought it would be linked to Shimmer, but nope. It's just a random chemical, I guess. D. Echo is awesome, both in Arcane and in the core universe. His Lullaby story made a lot of people cry, but he hasn't gotten an update in a while. B. Elise herself is a really interesting character, but she lacks updates. C. Evelynn is also a really interesting character, but she lacks importance in the world. C. Ezreal has awesome Indiana Jones stories as he's traveling around the world. And he is connected to crucial world events. A. Fiddlesticks is a mystery done right. What he is a speculation, but the mystery is set up so well. Take notes, Amumu. A. Fiora has a lot of good stories that all end as cliffhangers, until she gets a story with Jax. B. Fizz is kinda just not interesting. He doesn't have a lot of lore, but the stories around him are interesting. C. Galio is a really awesome character, but it's a shame that he's not being used in any of the recent stories. B. Gangplank is one of the fundamental villains of Bilgewater, and he was in Ruined King. A. While many may think that Garen is a generic character, his personal stories are glorious. He is an important character in every single one of his stories. There is a reason why he got a novella. S. Gnar started as a good idea for a character, and then he was forgotten and his story never led anywhere. D. While Gragas's bio is really bland, his short story is awesome. Unfortunately, that can't carry him above C. Graves and Twisted Fate have amazing stories, but they suffer from really bad bios. Still, A. Gwen is surprisingly an interesting character despite not so interesting design, and she proved to be important during the Sentinels of Light. I think. We're still not sure what's canon there. B. Hecarim is surrounded by so many amazing stories, with only one being centered around him. B. Heimerdinger currently has 3 sentences of lore, but I guess it's canon lore. F. Illaoi has many different stories connected to many different champions, and she was in Ruined King. A. Irelia is a really important character for Ionia, but her story was never pushed beyond the events of the invasion. B. Ivern is a really interesting character with a really awesome history. It's a shame he's not being used in the recent stories though. B. Janna has a lot of world-building lore that connects Shurima and Zaun. She herself is lacking stories though. B. Jarvan became a great character after the Mage Civil War, and the Aftermath story is amazing. A. Jax is connected to one of the best storylines of Runeterra. The Icathian War is amazing, and he is a crucial character there. S. Unfortunately, Jace hasn't seen an update in a really long time, and compared to Arcane, he is quite boring. C. Jin's story is simple, important, amazing, and he has his own comic. S. Once again, compared to her Arcane version, where she was amazing, the canon Jinx is kinda empty. C. Kaisa has some really interesting stories, but it is all just a setup so far. Hopefully the Voidy event will push her above B. Kalista is a really interesting character who was also really important for the Ruination. I can't wait to see what the Ruination novel does to her. A. For as important as one would believe Karma is, she's really not, and her stories don't really do anything to her. C. Karthus is an interesting character who is heavily underutilized. C. Kassadin is a really interesting character as well, but for an unknown reason, his spotlight was stolen away by Kaisa. C. Katarina used to have interesting interactions with Garen, but eventually those were retconned, and now her lore is empty. C. Kayle and Morgana lay out some really awesome foundations for Demacia, but until their setup gets paid off, they only get a B. Kayn is a cool character with a cool background, but his dark inside is not really being explored. B. Kennen is a character that every now and then appears in really important stories, but he is never the main character. B. Kha'Zix was awfully left behind. He does have canon lore, but his side of it is really bad. F. Kindred are simply flawless. The character is interesting, the lore is awesome, and the stories written for them are one of the best in League. S. Glad is a crazy yordle. The end. C. Kog'Maw currently has no lore. LeBlanc is a really interesting character, she is important for Noxus, and she keeps getting updated. A. Lee Sin has a good story that is really starting to show its age. C. For a relatively new champion, Lilia's story is not too bad. B. Lissandra is a fundamental character for Freljord, and she doesn't have one, but 2 amazing stories. S. Lucian is a cool demon hunter styled character. But that's it. B. Lulu is quite bland, but her story with Tristana makes sure she gets at least C. Lux is a really important character for Demacia. She has 3 amazing stories and a comic. S. For the longest time, Malphite was a lore meme. He simply didn't have a story. But then Riot used the Uno reverse card and now he's in B. Malzahar recently got a story that is teasing the new Void champion, which easily got him a B. We'll see if he gets higher during the Voidy event. While Maokai may not feel that interesting, Ruined King gave him some really cool new depth. B. Mastery's bio is fine, the Homecoming story is good, but his story with Master Doran is godly. S. Misfortune is a really deep character full of twists and turns which you wouldn't expect. She has a comic and she is the main character of Ruined King. S. Mordekaiser's story is among my favorite. It is extremely simple, extremely badass and extremely important for Runeterra. S. As interesting as Nami is, she suffers from lack of updates. C. Even though Nasus has not seen an update in a while, his old stories do stand the test of time. B. Nautilus is a really good Bilgewaterian legend that could see more love. C. Nico set up her origins in the bio, and that's it. C. Nidalee is in the exact same boat, quite a forgotten champion. C. Nocturne started as a pretty cool idea, but slowly through Zed and Lux, he became amazing. A. Even though Nunu is not the most mind-blowing character, the history behind Willump is pretty good. And the two have a few heartwarming stories. B. At first, Olaf didn't look like a great character, his bio was very simple, but over time he kept appearing in more and more interesting stories. B. Orianna is another one of those characters who are cool, but they lack updates. C. Ornn is an extremely unique character, he is really important in the stories, and he pushes the lore forward. A. Pantheon is really good, but unfortunately a lot of his amazing lore belongs to Aurelion and Aatrox. Although, with the latest story, he easily gets an A. For a while, Poppy was awesome! But then, everyone got better and she stayed behind. Why show her in the cinematic when nothing happens to her again? C. Pyke is all over the place, his story is really interesting but it is also really tiny. On the other side, he also got a good story in Ruined King. Overall, B. Qiyana launched as a pretty bland character despite her introducing a new region. But over time, her story ramped up and these days, if you count the stories connected to her, she's a solid A. Quinn is an amazing side character, be it in Sona's past or Garen's present. She's everywhere, but she hasn't gotten her own spotlight yet. B. Rakan and Xayah have some amazing stories where they are fighting the Shadow Order. That's on top of the cinematic. A. While Rammus really doesn't have a lot of lore, the idea behind his mystery and the self-aware jokes carry him to C. Reksai is a void mummy. That's her entire lore. F. Right now, Rell is just one massive cliffhanger. We have no idea where her lore is heading. So currently, D. For the newest champion, Renata has a decently interesting lore, it is a pretty good setup as well, but there just isn't much of it. C. Renekton is on a similar level to Nasus. A good story connected to other good champions. B. Even after his updates, Rengar's story just lacks purpose. They even tried to fix it by letting him hunt Viego during the Sentinels of Light, which did nothing to him. C. Throughout the last 2 years, Riven's story became a staple. Her story is simply iconic now. She has a 3-part story where she confronts Yasuo, a 3-part story where Noxians hunt her in Ionia, and during the Sentinels of Light, her story was one of the better ones. S. Rumble has a hilarious story with kids in Shurima. That's really it though. C. As badass as Ryze is, the excellency of his lore rubbed onto Brand. Ryze's own story is far closer to A. Similar to the other new champions, Samira's story is just a setup, and nothing happened to her just yet. C. Recently, Riot decided to give Sejuani an awesome treatment. Her stories just keep getting better and better, and her interactions with Volibear easily carry her to an S. Senna had the misfortune of being connected to not one of the best storylines, but she still has a really good amount of great stories. B. Okay, so, you know what I'm about to do. Partially I'm doing it for the memes, but partially I stand behind that decision. Seraphine's KDA lore is really good, easily an A, but her story in the core universe? F. Visually she feels off, thematically she feels off, and she's making interactions with the Breckern awkward. If you cut her from the story, nothing changes. Technically she should be closer to a D though. Seth is a great, simple character. He also has minimal, albeit interesting lore. Still C. Shaco is one of the few champions who has no lore. Shen and Zed have an excellent story. From the beginning to the end, it is all exciting. They are not an S because Jhin steals their thunder, but they are still an easy A. Even though Shyvana doesn't have a lot of lore, the lore she has serves great purpose for Demacia and Jarvan. B. Singed is a totally different character from his arcane version. And in fact, he is a lot better in the core universe. If you like horror stories, the story called The Host is the best in League. Easy S. Sion is one of the most underutilized characters in League. His story suggests that he should be interesting, but he hasn't been touched in 8 years. D. Despite Sivir also not seeing an update in years, the old stories she has stood the test of time. B. Skarner is going to get a VGU, so his story will most likely change again. In its current state, it's a C. It's interesting, but there's not a lot of it. Sona was always an interesting character, but recently she got a great story to top it all off. A. Over time, Soraka slowly turned from just a celestial being into an interesting character. Just remember that Soraka is secretly linked to Syndra's story. That earns her a B at least. Swain is great. He is a fundamental Noxian, he has a rich history, and he has a great demonic mystery. A. Silas is an S. Despite the fact that he is a relatively new champion, he arrived with an insane story, and he's been pushing the story of Demacia forward ever since. A brilliant character overall. While Syndra's bio is just fine, the Dreaming Pool story is so good she gets an A. Tahm Kench is an excellent mythical demon that has never done anything in the lore. C. Talia's story is surprisingly really good. It is interesting, rich, and who knows, maybe in the Void event she gets even higher. A. When it comes to Talon, he's kinda a pointless character right now. He's done nothing and he's doing nothing. D. Tariq's story is quite good, he reveals a lot about Demacian traditions. And he is connected to one of the recent amazing stories. B. Teemo has never gotten a story. I don't know what's happening with him. F. Thresh's story comes from the outside, be it other champions or other games. He's lacking a big story that would be focusing on himself, but still, A. Just like Lulu, Tristana is kinda there. C. Trundle's bio is fine, but his recent short story is excellent. B. For being one of the fiercest warriors of Freljord, Tryndamere is not doing anything. C. Did you know that Twitch has lore? Yeah, me neither. F. I have talked about the Silence for the Damned story so many times already. You know Udyr is an S, and he bloody deserves it. Urgot has an interesting history in Noxus, an interesting story in Zone, and an interesting setup for the future. B. Despite Varus' story being a bit older, it still holds really well. I just wish it didn't end so abruptly. A. Vayne is simply a good character with interesting past. A. Veigar has an interesting history with Mordekaiser, and he has a funny story of his own. He's a great comedic character. B. Vel'Koz is an interesting character despite his own story being really short. The reason why he is so good is because he explains the Watchers. In a way, he is fundamental. A. Once again, Vex is a new champion, but her story reveals an interesting truth about the Yordles. B. Similar to Caitlyn, Vi is different from her arcane version, but her stories in the Undercity are still great. A. We can meme all we want, but the reality is, Viego's story is quite rich. He has his own stories, the plotline is decent, and he has a game named after him. A. To this day, Victor might be my favorite lore character. He is equally as good as he is in Arcane, but he is lacking that one big story to push him to the very top. A. Despite Vladimir not doing much right now, his stories that prepare him for coming out of his hiding are excellent. A. Volibear has the best story out of all the demigods, and his interactions with those who worship him are awesome. A. Warwick is good, but all the great lore is squeezed out of him by Singed. He serves as a great supporting character. C. Wukong is decent, he has a good interaction with Yi, but that's where it all stopped. C. Xerath is as good as Azir, the two together are the foundation of the Shuriman lore, though I think Xerath might be slightly better than Azir. A. Xin Zhao is currently an excellent character, he is almost the counterpart to Sylas. He has two big stories, both of them are excellent and for that he deserves an S. Yasuo has so much lore. Just like Riven, he's been fleshed out over the years. And his story in Ruined King is good. And the game ended his story with yet another setup, so there is more coming. S. On the other hand, Yone is riding off of Yasuo's success. He is fine, but he himself didn't make it that far. B. You see, if Yorick actually fought Viego, he would be a lot higher. But currently his story ended with him getting ready to fight Viego, which never happened. C. Yumi is getting ready to find Nora, the end. C. Zac was a chemical experiment, the end. C. Zeri has a nice setup for a future fight with Renata, and she became Echo's friend. Still, nothing's happening with her just yet. C. Ziggs's bio is fine, but he does have a cool comic, and he got his own cool story. B. Zillion has a really interesting bio that is hopefully setting him up for the Void event. But so far, C. Zoe is difficult to rate, she herself is not doing anything. But she is technically connected to the Twilight of the Gods story, and that alone gave her a B. And finally, Zyra got a cool story where Noxians tried to explore her territory. You can imagine how that went down. B. But that is all the champions ranked based on how good their lore is. Once again, remember, this is all subjective and your opinions may be different, but in general, I'm happy with this. I would be a lot happier if we got more than one story this month. Riot has to be preparing something for the Void, right? But yeah, I swear to God, if it's a sexy champion, I am dedicating a rage video about her. Can we get anything? Like, any content at all? Anything. Riot, I am starving.